It's time to read ghost stories. Real, true paranormal tales with Kitton. Let's go. Terrifying encounter with a creepy woman. I had a creepy experience just the other day, and I can't shake off, so I thought I would share it here with you. So the day before yesterday, I was with my mother near Borivali station in Mumbai, running some errands. Afterwards, we were both hungry, so we decided to grab some food from a random stall near us. Just as we were standing there, waiting on our order, I noticed something unusual. There was a woman on the other side of the road. Her skin was a dark shade, almost like she could have been from an African background. But something about it all felt off. I didn't think much about it at the time. I just went on with my day, and this is where the story gets strange. After we got our street food, we started walking home, and as we were walking, I saw the same woman behind us. But this time, she looked entirely different. Her face suddenly had cuts and scars around her neck. I'm not sure though, because I didn't think, looking back on it, if I could really see it properly. But as far as I can tell, it was almost like a zombie. Her hair was messy, and the expression was as if she had been crying, but it wasn't just any kind of crying. It was like that ugly, distorted cry that is truly despair. And I can't really describe it, but it felt terribly sad and wrong. Both me and my mum were freaked out. We started walking faster, but the whole time she was behind us just a few steps. She didn't say anything, not a word, but her presence was almost paranormal, unsettling. It was like she was just wandering, lost, or stuck in some kind of emotional distress. And when she crossed the road, the whole scene became even more eerie. As she walked across the road, I watched her slowly disappear into thin air in front of us. Last night, I remembered her face again, and I couldn't sleep. I just felt so scared about what I had seen. I didn't understand how someone could just be walking in the road in broad daylight and then vanish in front of not just me, but my mother. I knew I wasn't crazy because my mother had seen her as well. I'm still unsure about what exactly it was that I saw, but I'm wondering if anyone else saw her there. I don't know if perhaps it was just a hallucination, or if it was a person in a real crisis, or could it have been something else, like a ghost? Ghost Man caught by teenagers playing a game of manhunt. This story is scary, more than just strange. The area I grew up in has gone from small farming community to a thriving suburb over the past 60, 70 years. When I was about 15, I'm 28 years old now, on a warm summer night, a group of us teenagers got together and we played a game of manhunt between an elementary school and our local high school, which is located roughly 500 feet from each other. There was a massive stool, where a massive small used to be, not sure what that means. After the game, a few of us were walking towards a small batch of woods to make some stuff you smoke, we'll say. As we got closer to the woods, on the trail we saw an old white man. I guessed he was around 60s in age, wearing an old-fashioned farmer's clothing, and walking in the same direction we were towards the woods. My friend and I were confused as what the older man would be doing out, walking between an elementary school and a high school at that time of night, roughly 12 to 1 a.m. Decided to run up and get a closer look at this man. As we got closer to him, he continued into the trees, and we lost sight of a strange figure. We ran to just where he had went into, and he wasn't there anymore. We looked around the trees, we peeked around the nearby area as much as we could, but still no sign of him. We were so confused as to what we just saw. He wasn't very far away from us, He couldn't have gotten very far, truth be told, in the 5 seconds that it took us to catch up with him. We think it may well have been a ghost of an old farmer, perhaps because of the clothes he had, tending to his farmland. After seeing that, we looked at each other just confused. We laughed, joked about it, smoked him and left. Oddly, we went back another night, a month later, and we still could not find him again. Thank you to those of you that read my story. This is my first post here, and I hope that you guys enjoy. Shadow person / entity / evil ? Okay, so I have an odd story. To me, it's pretty creepy, and I've thought about it over the years at random times in my life. I was a preteen, grew up and still live in a relatively small town in Washington state, on the other side of the mountain from the coast. Our town is in a valley, very safe growing up. My mum had a long-time friend from high school, and she had her son, my younger brother's age, and a daughter a year older than me, so we spent a lot of time together. I was a pretty quiet, introverted kid due to the environment I lived in, which is not relative to this story. However, the reason I never spoke about what happened until now. The girl's name was Heather. She was very outgoing, very much a bully as well. Looking back now, I realize it was her way of survival with the kind of mother that she had. Her mum scared the hell out of me, anyways. I would hang out with Heather, even though I really don't like to because she was quite mean. But one of the things we would do, that I had done with several friends growing up, was sleep outside. We'd sleep in the backyard, without a tent, just in our sleeping bags. It was definitely a different era then. No fences, anyone could have seen us from the road. But there wasn't a thought that something bad could happen. It was summer, and we planned to sleep outside, like we had many times before. But this night, I just had an awful feeling that something wasn't right. An unsettling feeling, nothing I can put my finger on. We talked and laughed, and then it got really late, so Heather started falling asleep. Her home was a duplex, 1 story, with a carport on each side. You could see through the carport into the backyards easily, a residential area in town. So, the mountains that surround our valley were several miles away. The backyard had bushes against a fence that led to the backyards of the next street up houses, and then a busy road that was beyond that street. Like I said, we had slept outside in the backyard many times before, without anything ever happening. This night, I had a strange feeling, the one that you get when you feel like you're being watched. And I stayed laying in my sleeping bag as Heather slept beside me. But I kept my eyes open, looking all around us as covertly as possible, trying to figure out why it was I felt so scared. I realized there wasn't any noise, no cars driving the busy road for 2 streets over. It was like 10 on a Saturday night. No birds. The crickets stopped. Just pure, eerie silence. I get goosebumps now thinking about it, and I cannot explain the sickening feeling that suddenly came over me. If it was anxiety or something else. But then my ears started ringing, and there was this high-frequency noise mixed in with a sort of TV static. It was painful, and as I was thinking about going to get my mum to figure out why my ears were ringing and so painful, Heather suddenly sat straight up, eyes open, breathing heavily. She moved so robotically but fast, her head turned all the way to her right, to where I was lying, staring up at her with my eyes wide. And then I realized the ringing had stopped. Still, no other sounds. She was looking my way, but not even focused on me. It was like she was looking straight through me. And then she started talking. I thought she was mumbling, maybe sleep-talking, and then it hit me that she was speaking some other language. My mum is white and my dad is Mexican, so I've grown up being bilingual. And I know she was speaking another language and not just gibberish. But it was nothing I could put my finger on. She continued to get louder, and I swear everything got darker. The moon had been out, no clouds, so you could see fairly well. And then it was pitch black. She continued speaking in this strange language. It was still silent, but something was moving out of the corner of my eye. I slowly turned my head away from Heather and saw a black shadow. No features, still no noise. And it emerged from the ground in the yard next to us by the neighbour's duplex. I knew it couldn't be anyone from there because it was a young girl and her toddler on that old couple in the duplex, and I couldn't explain what it was I was seeing. It gradually got larger, and it was shaped like a cloaked figure moving very slowly towards us. I was frozen in fear. My fight or flight did not kick in. All of a sudden, as I'm watching the dark figure slowly creep over the grass, coming towards us, it moves, fast, like a rush of black smoke, and right into Heather. She immediately starts screaming the unknown words and is shaking violently as if possessed. I shot up so fast and ran inside to wake up my mum, screaming that something was very, very wrong. Heather's mum heard me, and both mums ran outside. I stood at the back door. I was too scared to go back out, just watching in fear. Heather was laying in her sleeping bag, sleeping soundly and peacefully. I could hear cars going by all of a sudden, the birds, the crickets, all the normal nighttime sounds returned. They looked back at me like I was crazy, and woke Heather up, asking her if she was okay. She said yes, she was fine, totally normal. And then they asked if I wanted to go back and sleep out there. I refused and slept in the living room. Heather, however, would not come inside. The next morning, we were supposed to go to church with her grandma. Her grandma picked us girls up, and I sat in the back seat, while she sat up front. She hadn't talked to me as we were getting ready, and weirdly completely avoided me, which was strange, because she was the kind of kid who needed to be around people all the time, constantly talking and asserting herself. As her grandma was saying what time we would be back to our mums, I leaned in and asked Heather if she remembered anything about last night. She said no, and I began explaining to her what had happened. The driver's side door was open, and I didn't see her grandma coming up at the same time. She heard me asking Heather if she remembered anything and how she knew another language. When I'd known her my whole life and never heard her speak anything but English. Her grandma asked me what happened and immediately asked me what the language sounded like. So I went through what happened, without telling her about the shadow I saw or the strange, painful ringing in my ears. Her grandma was super serious actually and took it all in. She didn't say anything else or ask any more questions, and we rode in silence to church for the most part. Other than Heather telling me I sounded crazy, we usually sat in the middle, my and her grandma's friends, but that day she made us sit in the first pew of the church. She held Heather's hand the entire time, praying and crying. It was very out of the norm, and Heather was annoyed and embarrassed by it, and kept trying to bring her hand away. When church finished, we walked back to the car and got in. Her grandma didn't start the car to leave, and instead turned to Heather. I can't remember word for word what she said, but I do remember her telling her that she must go to church now every Sunday, and that she was going to have her stay with her for the rest of the summer break. Wow. And she said that she would protect her. I think Heather was happy to get away, because her mum at the time was actually pretty abusive. But I knew her grandmother wasn't talking about her mum. She said she had met something when she was very young, and it spoke a language that she'd never heard before, and she knew what it was saying. It offered her a way out of where she was, that she needed to agree to it and she could be saved, but that she knew it wasn't God, that it was something dark, and something that she would rather suffer and die from than say yes. I saw Heather less and less over time, and then my grandparents took me and my brother in, and we lived in the same town, but we hung around different groups, so I would see her at school occasionally, but that was about it. Our mums remained in contact, and last year my mum mentioned that Heather's grandma had passed away, and I said, you know what, that's too bad. I barely remember her, but she seemed so sweet. My mum mentioned that she had a very hard life, and she had been in a concentration camp when she was very young. I knew she was from Norway, but I'd never heard this story before. I put two and two together, and I believe whatever came to Heather that night was similar to the same thing that came to my grandma. And that night those odd words are burned into my mind. I've never heard anything remotely close to that strange language since. Coincidence, or just plain scary? When I was 16, in the summer, this was August 2016, I had this girlfriend. She was always on my case, and I didn't take this too far at first. But one day I was home alone in my room, and I was on the phone with her, and she was telling me a story, and suddenly she asked me who I was with. I was like, no one, I'm just in my room. She then asked, who is the girl that I'm with? I got defensive, as literally there was no one even in the house. She told me she heard a girl say something about breaking through the window. She asked if it was the TV, and I said, there's no TV in my room, or even on that level of my house. I just brushed all this off, and we broke up very soon after. October 2016, I had this friend who I was on the phone with. The same scenario. I'm home alone in my room. She's telling me a story and pauses. I ask her what the pause was for, and she says, oh, I heard your mum or someone talking with you. And I explained that I was home alone. She then says to me, whoever was there is talking about breaking in through the window. I got really scared at this point, thinking back to my ex saying the exact same thing. Then she says she hears a man and a woman talking loudly, and then it disappears. I went in the hallway to go downstairs, and it was oddly cold, and she said the man sounds creepy, like as if I'm watching a scary movie. I went to the kitchen, and when my mum got home, I told her, and we looked upstairs. As we did so, a door slammed shut right in front of us, and then the lights proceeded to turn off by themselves. I didn't like the vibe of my house after that, but nothing like that happened again until I finally moved out. Scary encounter at the beach near the woods with my girlfriend. Note, so I'm like writing this, like 2 hours after the experience. Me and my girlfriend loved to take late night walks. We decided to go to this beachy area near my house in the Netherlands. It's not really a beach at the sea, just a large lake with a beach next to it. I love to go to this spot and have fun with my friends, and it's a very common place for people from my city to swim there in the summer. There's a bar and a terrace where you can order food and drinks and everything. Normally, this is a very chill spot. That's what I thought until today anyway. was around 10:30, and we were just watching a movie. As I said, I love to take long walks, so we did that after. First, you have to walk for a small area of forest, but nothing scary, just a normal asphalt area, and there is a small cabin where people live. As we approach the beachy part, we sit on a bench just to chill there for a while. We stand up again and walk further along the water. We take a right and walk again. In radius of about 200 meters from every part of the beach is a very large forest. We were just walking and walked past a few tents along the way, as people love to go camping there. As we approach the end of the beach, we suddenly hear a loud man screaming and crying coming from a distance. It sounded as though someone was having a proper mental breakdown. Sounds like me recently. As a normal reaction, my girlfriend didn't like it much, and neither did I. We took a 180-degree turnabout and then walked straight back. Every 5 to 10 seconds or so, we heard this manly cry and screaming again, which echoed over the entire lake, about 500 meters from where we first heard it. We figured we were far away enough and went to sit on the beach again. Suddenly, we heard the cries again. The screams were louder this time. It was coming closer and closer. The screams and cries kept going, and they just approached us more and more to where we were sitting. So naturally, we took a run for it, towards that road again. In between the beach and the forest is a large open field. As we stop running and start normally walking, the cry becomes fainter as we move further and further away. But every time we stop, it keeps coming closer again. We figured it was walking the same road as we were, and as we walk faster and faster back home, I take one last look back behind us, and suddenly I see this tall figure wearing all black stumbling out of the shrubs and small trees along the road. The screaming and crying was something I have never heard before in my life. And I've never actually seen or heard someone produce that type of noise and so much sound since. Only something you would hear in a horror movie. The figure then stopped walking and just stood still in the middle of the field. Still crying, though. We sprint as fast as we can back to my house. I was absolutely terrified and don't know what I saw. Once we enter the more populated area, we see a man cycling towards us on a bike, going in the direction where we had just come from. I decided to inform him about what we had just seen and heard. He too responded with a 180-degree turn and cycled straight the other way, which I fully understand now. It's about 2.5 hours after, and I still can't get that sound out of my head. I didn't know who, or what it was, or why it was even there. I first thought I should go towards the figure and see if maybe I could offer my help, as it didn't sound as if it was having too much of a good time. I didn't want to take the risk, as it could be someone who could perhaps cause me serious harm, or maybe even had weapons on them. It could have harmed the best person who crossed its path, in an attempt to take out his anger or sadness on someone. I'm now home, lying in bed. I want to forget what I saw and heard, but I just can't. This is all real. I swear on every person in my family. What I saw as a child changed me. Warning, long yapping ahead. All right, this took place when I was 8 years old. Me and my family took a trip to the Union Station in Ogden, Utah. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I did not. Utah folks, feel free to let me know in the comments below if I messed it up. Because it's a beautiful historical site for the early day trains that were built and used. Recently, in 2024, the Union Station celebrated its 100th year anniversary after it was rebuilt in 1924 from a horrible fire, which definitely played a role into the haunted energy the place has even now. When there is a kid, you can feel those sort of feelings and energies a bit better. Some areas or rooms have a heavy feeling to them, and it just makes you feel off. Probably due to the Union Station serving a significant part of World War I and World War II, which places connected with those wars are natural and have more haunted energy from all the heavy feelings, which will be important for this story, so please take note. One of the best areas of Union Station was outside the south side of the building, where some of the very old trains were parked for people to see and touch. Some trains you could actually get inside of and look around, read some history about what the train's purpose was. One of the trains that was there was a Baldwin 0-60 steam locomotive military train, used for moving troops and equipment from what I remember. You were able to access some of the carts, which held the soldiers inside. While I was running around, because trains are cool, I ran into there and admittedly felt this heavy feeling, and suddenly I stopped running. Looking around the cart, and not wanting to be disrespectful for some reason, about halfway through the cart, I heard a whisper in my ear. I kid you not, I heard a man's voice, clear as day, whisper into my ear, "Help me," in a painful voice, like a spirit of a soldier who was perhaps injured before he had passed. After hearing some random voice, little 8-year-old me ran so fast out of that cart and looked back to see if I was just hearing someone playing a trick on me. When looking back, I was frozen in fear, as through one of the glass windows in the next car, I saw a shadow figure, around 5'10" in height, and with very thin arms. The figure was just staring at me. After I collected myself from this pit of fear deep in my stomach, I ran to my family, tears in my eyes of not understanding what it was that I had just seen. Till I got to my papa, I was even not able to properly speak, still crying and struggling. I told him that I saw a shadow figure with no face in the car train. He asked me to show him where, and I nervously walked him back over and pointed at where this figure had stared at me so adamantly. Of course, there wasn't anything there. For my papa served some time as a Marine, and he also believes in the paranormal. So, he taught me how to protect myself from the spirits. He had me say out loud, "I saw you, and you must stay here in this train. Stay away from this child." Which, for people who don't know about paranormal stuff, telling a spirit that they may not come with you actually helps prevent attachment. That's true. After saying that, I felt better, because my parent took control of the situation and told me that everything would be okay. Over the years since then, I have loved the paranormal and done many more investigations with my dad. Looking back, I feel the event was the main catalyst for the rest of the paranormal activity that I've heard or seen in my life. I have been back to the Union Station since, and haven't unfortunately seen or heard anything like that again. I have had a similar experience in other places, and I thought this would be a great, slightly terrifying story to share with you all. TLDR, at the age of 8, me and my family took a trip to Union Station. One of the things you can do there is go inside trains. While going into the military train, I saw and heard a shadow figure. The figure whispered, "Help me," in my ear, and I ran out of the cart so fast. The name on this story already has me laughing. And it was East Texas Baby Flash. I told the story to ChatGPT and had it write the story for me. Okay, so this is interesting. This technically will be a real ghost story, but it's going to be told, I guess, by AI. So I'm just giving the disclaimer on that. It's a real story, but they've put it through ChatGPT. So if it sounds like AI, that's because AI is writing it. Disclaimer done. The Red Blur, an encounter in East Texas. I don't usually share stuff like this, but something happened recently that's been eating at me. And the weirdest part is, I wasn't the only one who saw it. It was around 6 p.m., early spring, as I was driving through rural East Texas. Thick pine forest on both sides of a 2-lane road, underbrush tangled up like nature didn't want to let anything get through. The kind of place where you lose cell service and time seems to stretch. I just picked up a baby goat. I love the way this story's going. Random detail, I know, but maybe worth mentioning. Baby goats are always worth mentioning, especially if you've been watching Severance. My mum was a riding passenger with me. We were cruising around 50 miles per hour on a worn-down road when this happened. About 30 feet ahead, something appeared. I don't mean ran across the road or darted out of the trees. I mean, one moment the road was empty, and the next, it was just there. It was the size of a squirrel, maybe 8 to 10 inches tall, and deep blood red. Not a natural red, not rust, not clay. It was vivid, artificial almost. But what really messed me up was the speed. If you blinked, you'd miss it. Actually, scratch that. I didn't even have time to blink. It was there, in a frame of my vision, like a glitch in a video game. One instant, it was mid-lane, and the next, it was on the right side of the road. Gone. It had no features, no limbs, no head. Just this upright smear of red, like someone had launched a paintball made of light and static. No sound, no rustling of brush, no sign it had ever been there. But both of us saw it. My mum let out a, "What the hell was that?" right as my skin lit up with goosebumps. It wasn't just shock. It was like some part of my body knew before my brain had caught up with me that the thing was wrong. Not evil exactly, just unnatural, ungodly. We kept driving. Phones were dead. Normal out there. And the baby goat, yes, the baby goat was quiet in the back of the car. The road ahead just looked like it always did, but something had changed. The air felt thinner, like the forest was holding its breath. Since then, nothing weird has happened. No lights in the sky, no bad dreams, just that moment replaying in my head. Sometimes I wonder if we caught a glimpse of something from the edge of reality, or maybe it saw us. Either way, I don't think I'll ever forget that red blur. My aunt's haunted basement, in brackets, long story. One day, I went over to my aunt's house to sleep, because I'd been out drinking all night the night before. It was about 10 a.m. when I got there. She had given me the okay to sleep in the basement, so I went down to lay on the futon-type couch. I tossed and turned for what felt like 20 minutes. I came to check the time, and it had suddenly been 9 p.m. The basement had been very dim, just enough to make out figures of things in the basement, because the light that was on didn't work too well. I laid there with my eyes closed, trying to fall back asleep. But I could not sleep, so I sat up and turned on the game that was in the basement. I tried to play the game for maybe 10 minutes, and then laid back down to get some sleep. The same thing. I tossed and turned for what felt like another 10 to 20 minutes, and then checked the time, and before I knew it, it was suddenly 2 a.m. I then got up again. I texted my cousin because he was supposed to pick me up. I got up to watch for him through the basement window. The window was about half a foot or a foot higher than me. I jumped a couple of times to look out, and as I did so, I got an eerie feeling. So I grabbed a stool to stand on it. Suddenly, after a couple of seconds of looking out of the window, there was a hard scratching on the concrete wall, just an inch or two from my ear. I slowly turned my head. There was nothing there. So I decided to go to the other window, on the other side of the basement. Usually my aunt's furnace made 2 banging sounds every 30 minutes or so. I was okay hearing that, but after 2 bangs, there was something that had peeked its head from behind them. So I told myself, that's okay, nothing I haven't experienced before. But then as I got to the other side of the stairs, near the other window, I looked, and there was an 8-foot-tall shadow-like figure just standing there looking straight at me. Again, I told myself, as long as you're not scared, it's not going to bother you. So I went and stood looking out the window, and then, after I got down and ran up the stairs and outside as fast as I could into the street, thankfully, my cousin had just started to pull up. I then started to tell him what had happened as soon as I got in the car. That's the closest anything has gotten to me other than my encounter with the little figure, and I seriously believe it was some kind of demon that perhaps had evil intentions. 7 years of childhood paranormal trauma. Using a throwaway, as people I know, IRL, in real life, follow me on my main. For the first 18 years of my life, we lived in a small village of fens, in the English countryside. It's an old village, with centuries of histories behind it. My issues with what I can only describe as the paranormal didn't begin until I was 7 years old. My parents had just brought a new home to accommodate our growing family, as my sister had just come along. It was a nice house in a nice area, and the house itself wasn't too old. I think it's constructed, probably to be dated in the late 20th century. My parents loved it, my sister loved it, and I hated it. I don't really know where to begin. I don't have a clear timeline of the events in my head, so I apologize in advance if this post is really scatterbrained. I'm pretty much going to write things down as I remember them. I can kind of remember how it started. A knocking at my bedroom door. One night, as I was falling asleep, I heard 2 knocks at my door. I sat up and said, "Come in." Silence. I repeated myself and sat in silence. I was the kind of kid who is easily frightened, and this frightened me. The knocks were clearly on my door, but no one is coming in, no one is answering me. I'm too scared to go and open the door. For the next couple of weeks, this became a daily occurrence. As I'm falling asleep, 2 knocks at my door, again, followed by silence. I told my parents I was scared and that this was happening to me. To put it down to an overactive imagination, but for my benefit, they left the landing light on to be kind. However, because of this, I could see very clearly that there was no one standing outside my door from a light coming in under it. I would still hear the knocks. Eventually, I was able to muster up the courage to get out of my bed and go and try and open the damn door. Unsurprisingly, there was no one there to greet me. I closed my door and I went straight back to bed. My bed was a bunk bed, but where the bottom bed would be, I had a desk and a chair set up. Once I got back into my bed, I started to hear something new. A sound of rustling, like someone was going through papers at my desk, like they were going through my drawers. I got up again, I turned the light on, and nothing. The knocking on my door stopped after this. However, the rustling under my bed continued for months. One night, I had enough and I sat up in bed. I yelled at the top of my voice, "Stop it!" And it stopped. I was certain my parents would hear me and come running to see if I was okay. But they didn't. They never did. After this, the rustling stopped. The knocking stopped. It all just suddenly stopped. My experiences weren't strictly limited to just hearing things. I saw things too, though it was significantly rarer. I can only think of 2 clear occasions. The first time it happened, I was sat in front of a living room TV, watching it with my mum. We'd sat down with a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits. How British of you. Once we had finished our teas and biscuits, my mum asked me to take the mugs and the plate out into the kitchen. As I walked into the kitchen, I got this horrible, unsettling feeling. I don't even know how to describe it. But even thinking about it while I type fills me with fear. It almost makes me want to cry. As I was walking through the kitchen, I got this feeling and I stopped. I looked to my left. To my left was a corridor, which led to my front door, and at the end of this corridor I saw the shadow of someone clearly standing there. No movement, no features. It's literally just the shadow of a person. I drop the plate and mugs, they smash, I scream, I run back into the living room. My mum is completely unfazed. I run up to her, I start crying. She asks me, "What's wrong?" I'm so confused. I ask her why she didn't come to check on me when I was screaming and breaking mugs and an entire plate. She didn't hear any of it. When I told her what had happened to me, she was still unfazed, and it scared me. It was loud. She must have heard it. She told me where the dustpan and the brush was, and that was it. Wow, that's cold, man. The second and final time I saw something is very similar to the first time. Again, I was in the living room, this time with my whole family. We were playing a game where we were taking in turns to throw a tennis ball into the hole in a tube. I threw the ball and it bounced off the tube and rolled back into that same corridor. I felt that same feeling as the last time, this horrible feeling. However, this time, instead of looking left to the front door, I look right to the kitchen. And on the floor I see the shadow of a person. Again, I scream. I scream louder than I did before. I run back into the living room. My entire family, just like my mother before, is completely unfazed. None of them care. They don't even care I'm horrified, that I'm screaming and crying. I tell them clearly what has happened. I'm told it's my overactive imagination. What a terrible family, man. Just cut them off. That's twice. If I had a kid and they literally had seen a shadow figure twice, and I was with other family members and they came running to me, I would at least check it out, okay? I wouldn't be like, "It's just an overactive imagination, you're fine. There's the pan and to go clean up your shit." This next experience happened when I was a bit older, probably around 14 years old. Old enough to have my own laptop. I'm sat in my room on the floor using my laptop, when all of a sudden I hear and feel this massive thud. It feels and sounds like someone just fell over. I was worried my mum might have fallen over. I run out of my room to my mum. At least he's checking on his mum to see who was next to me. And I see she's totally okay. And I ask if she heard that terrible noise of a loud thud. She didn't. It was just me. Just me again hearing these noises, and seemingly no one else. Whenever I was home alone, I was staying in my living room, with all the doors closed. As I mentioned earlier, I was an easily frightened child, and being there with the door closed, it made me feel safe. When I was home alone, I would hear what sounded like footsteps on the floor above me, above the living room that was my room, which is where it sounded like the footsteps would come from. I never investigated this. I never brought myself to go upstairs to see what was making that sound. However, this was the one time when I had a friend over and we were both home alone. We were in the living room and we'd been playing on the PlayStation when the footsteps start. He says, "Who's that? I thought we were the only ones home." I tell him that we are alone, and this is a sound that I hear when I'm alone, but no one believes me. He gets really scared, and we leave the house, and we go to his house instead. Good call. We're still friends, and we both still remember this event. Well, this tells me his kid was being gaslit because his friend, who's the kid, also heard the noises. So I guarantee, even though the parents didn't say anything, I bet they heard it too, and they're probably just trying to not freak out the child. That's my bet. That's all I can remember for now. I guess those were the things which stood out to me the most. I know there were many other things, but these are the ones that have stayed with me. Throughout all of this, I would often talk to my mum, telling her about what was happening, trying to express my fears, and looking for even some kind of comfort from her. And every time I brought it up, she couldn't care less. His mum is terrible in this story. She was completely unfazed. It was like I was talking to a robot. We finally moved out when I was 14. A couple of years later, I tried again to ask her about it. I asked her why she never acknowledged these things when I was afraid. She responded, annoyed. "What are you on about?" I was shocked. I remember trying to tell her about it countless times. I proceeded to tell her everything that had happened, and she was this time horrified and adamant that I'd never mentioned any of this to her. Or so she's saying. Even the events where she was involved, she had no recollection of them. From the ages of 14 to 18, I lived in a different house in the same village in England. And all of the horrible things I experienced were fortunately left behind in that old house. Some nights I would hear what sounds like someone opening and closing our kitchen cupboards. But, as you could imagine, by this point I was so used to this sort of thing, I would just try my best to ignore it. Poor kid. Sometimes, if I were to play my guitar in a room late in the evening, I would hear someone shushing me right next to my ear. Shh. I found out after we moved out that my room the landlord's mother had passed away in just before we moved in. She had died in that very room. I find it funny, thinking I might have just been sharing my room with a nice little old lady ghost who would get frustrated with me if I was making too much noise at night. And that's it, really. In the years since, I've seen a few different therapists because of this. Oh my God. Whenever I start bringing this up, they either ignore it or change the subject. It feels like a repeat of what would happen with my mum. I only really talk about it with my friend, who I mentioned earlier, because they had seen it as well, and more recently my girlfriend, who won't let me tell her all of it because it scares her. This is terrible, which I completely understand. I felt a lot of fear whilst writing this. Once I moved out of that village just before my 19th birthday, I never experienced anything like this again, and fingers crossed, I hope I never do. To wrap this up, I want to be completely honest. As a child going through these things, I was certain it was paranormal, everything felt very real to me. Looking back with a more skeptical mind, I find it hard to accept it was paranormal. As a child, I experienced many traumas, some of which I won't talk about here. Some of the ones I'm comfortable mentioning include bullying, physical, verbal abuse from a teacher, an alcoholic father, and parents who would argue loudly. I mention these because if I had to choose an explanation for these events, apart from that of the paranormal, I would say it was a response to the stressful and traumatic environment in which I was brought up in. And it stopped because I left the area where the associated traumas were with. Now, I actually do legitimately believe in this instance that you were experiencing paranormal activity which the adults in the household were not willing to acknowledge, maybe because it scared them. But in all seriousness, based on everything you've told in this story, I believe you. I think it's sad that your girlfriend can't listen to you about it, or your therapist, and I hope that you find someone that you can talk to about this, because it's valid, and I do believe you. I think everything you experienced is 100% real. The final line here is, it feels good to have written this out. I would love to hear some opinions on my experiences. Do you think it was paranormal, or was it psychological? Doors slamming, and a fairly visible figure. Unfortunately, there is no pictures to back this up, as I was about 12 when this happened. I'm 18 now. I would always stay up late, later than you might expect, watching content on my iPad, I can feel you, and just catching up with some of my favourite people to watch, like Jelly, Slogo Man, and all the stuff that you... Is that jelly as in jelly roll, one wonders? All the stuff you expect a 13-year-old to watch, really. I'd literally spent most of my nights watching stuff like this and playing games. I had a weird bed. It was a bunk bed, but without the bottom bed, I guess. Regardless, under my bed was a desk, and my PS4 on which I'd play games on. Most nights would usually just play out the same. Watch videos, and then fall asleep. But it was about 12-ish at night this night. I never really remember things all that well. But I guess you could say this is one of those events that you can remember to the minute. I just started watching videos, was sat with my iPad on my chest laying down, somewhat getting tired. But it felt weird. It was an old house, in fact a renovated barn house, so most doors had little windows above them. And of course my bed being quite high up, if I sat up I could see straight out of a window onto the landing. It was as if something was stood at the ladder of my bed to get up. So I'd take a look down, as I usually had a gut feeling, but of course, nothing strange was there. I brush it off, as usually at this point I watch scary stuff, as I had a strange reason to, just to try and scare myself perhaps. Honestly, I don't know why looking back, but I had one of those blinds where if you pull the string it goes up, and if you pull another it goes down. It was old, so it was hard to do, just to move it straight up and straight back down. At this point I'm still shook up, and I ran up to my parents' room and they just say it was a wind to calm me down. I took the bait, of course, being 13, and was none the wiser. There was the other cases of seeing figures out of the end of a hallway through my window. They never did anything but walk about, going in and out of the bathroom and perhaps even down the stairs. You could very clearly see these figures, but you could never hear them. So of course it wasn't exactly a real person. From that night on, it just kind of picked up in terms of activity. If you really want, you can ping me a message, and I could try and draw the things that I could see, but that's up to you. Every time we drove or passed or walked past, you could see something stood in that same window. Oh, what is this thing here? Hang on. 1 second, guys. It went up and down. I'm going to cut this short because I feel most people won't want to read the whole thing. But let me know, because there's much more to this. And for people listening to the podcast, the only reason I had that interruption is someone was attempting to join the feed and I'd not seen it before and didn't know how to react. But nonetheless, that's the story. I saw a Wendigo, and I wish I hadn't. I need to write this down before I convince myself that it didn't happen. This happened in December of last year. I was visiting my uncle in northern Minnesota, near the Canadian border. He's the kind of guy who prefers solitude. Lives in a cabin deep in the woods. No close neighbours, just the trees and whatever lives in them. I never minded visiting. I like the quiet. But after that night, I don't think I'll ever go back. It was the coldest night of the year, at least -30 degrees. Fahrenheit. My uncle had gone down into town for supplies, so I was alone. The cabin was warm, the fire was crackling, and I was scrolling on my phone when I heard it. Something was moving outside. Not footsteps, more like a dragging sound, slow, deliberate. At first I thought it was the wind, but then it came, the knock. Not at the door, at the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. My uncle's nearest neighbour was miles away. No sane person would be out in that cold. But the knocking came again. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window. I wish I hadn't. There was something standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but emaciated. What a word. With long, bony limbs, its skin looked frostbitten, almost blackened. Its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing on their own, like embers buried in a dying fire. I should have looked away. I should have closed the curtains, but I was frozen, staring, unable to breathe. And then it smiled at me. Its teeth were too many, too sharp, stretching across its face. It opened its mouth wider than any human should. And then it spoke. Let me in. The voice did not match the body. It sounded wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed, too deep, too garbled. I ran. I grabbed my uncle's rifle, locked the door, and backed into the farthest corner of the room. The knocking stopped, but I could hear the scraping against the walls outside. Slow, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, rifle shaking in my hands, until my uncle finally came back. The second his headlights swept across the trees, the noises stopped. He found me, pale, sweating, and gripping the gun like my life depended upon it. I told him everything. He didn't say a word. He just nodded and checked around the cabin. When he came back, he looked unsettled. There are no tracks in the snow, he said. Nothing. This was impossible. I heard it, I saw it. But he was right, there was nothing outside. No footprints, no marks on the walls, just the untouched snow and the silent, watching trees. I left the next morning and haven't been back since. My uncle still lives there to this day, but he told me something before I left. If you ever hear it again, he said, don't look, and whatever you do, never let it in. I haven't told anyone else until now, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. When I was about a kid, I was pulled into a dark void under my bed. I know memory isn't reliable, But a part of his story involves my dad, and he has confirmed his side, so here goes. When I was maybe 7 or 8, I was in my bedroom, standing beside my bed, playing with my toys. It was a single bed that was pretty high off the ground, high enough that my sister and I were able to hide underneath, and the toys couldn't fit under there, but an adult wouldn't. I was setting up a scene between Bratz and Beanie Babies. Well, that sounds like a 90s story if I heard one. When something underneath it caught my attention. I very distinctly remember something grabbing my ankles and pulling me off of my feet. I remember hitting the carpet and being dragged onto the bed into pitch blackness. But it felt like being pulled off a cliff into a massive empty pool of black. The next thing I remember, I'm stood in my bedroom yelling for my dad. That pulling me under the bed was not a funny thing to do at all. And weirdly I remember that it felt like I woke up in the middle of a sentence. He obviously asked me what the hell was going on. And very confusedly I had to explain that it wasn't him, and I decided I must have fallen asleep or perhaps dreamt it. According to my dad, he heard me screaming and came upstairs to see what was the matter. He came into my bedroom and found me standing on the middle of my bedroom, freaking out for him for pulling me under the bed. My dad was a pretty typical dad, joke humor kind of guy. He'd jump out at us from behind doors, poke us during scary parts of movies, and pick us up and carry us around by our ankles. So I guess in my kid brain, it made sense, but it had to be him. I don't remember what else happened that night. Pretty sure I slept in my mum's bed, because I was so freaked out, and that is what really happened.